Hello there and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Sorry we're a little bit late, but welcome to this week's Ukraine War Q&A with Professor Michael Clarke. We've been off for a couple of weeks, but now we are back and there is plenty for us to discuss. Good afternoon to you, Michael. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Kamali. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again. Although we're separated by a few, quite some distance in different studios, not around the table as we normally are. Great to see you. I can see you on the monitor here. So let's just get straight on with it. As a reminder, as we do every single week, if you want to ask questions as we are going along, please do so. Submit them in the blog or on the YouTube channel. And thank you again for submitting your questions. Let's get straight into it, Michael, because we've had a lot happen since we last spoke and since you last did one of these. We're going to go back to Friday and the summit in Anchorage, Alaska. Before we do the proper questions, let's just get a sense from you, Michael, as to what you thought of what we saw when Putin and Trump met on the red carpet.
Well, Kamali, I mean, I think I said on Sky the day of it, the day after. I mean, this goes back over 10 years, that every time Trump and Putin directly meet, every time they actually have a meeting, a formal summit, or they meet at another summit, like the General Assembly of the UN or the G20 meeting, or when they have a one-to-one over the phone or on an online call, the pattern is the same. And it's been the same for now over a decade, that Putin dominates Trump intellectually, politically and morally. And every meeting, Trump comes away saying more or less what Putin would like him to say. And that's exactly what happened at Ankara. And people were asking me beforehand, well, what do you think will happen? And I said, I think it'll be announced as a triumph on the day. And then it will all slip like sand through our fingers by about Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. Well, I was wrong about the first bit. It wasn't announced as a triumph on the day. It was announced as 10 out of 10, according to President Trump. He said, 10 out of 10 for the meeting. Nobody else thought it was really a triumph. But what did come out of the meeting is already slipping through our fingers like sand, because even the idea that there'll be a trilateral meeting as a result of it is now in doubt. Trump said, yes, there'll definitely now be another one, perhaps within a week. And Caroline Levitt, the spokesperson for the White House, said, yes, the Russians have agreed to another meeting. No, they haven't agreed. They haven't said anything. So already the thing is slipping away through our fingers. And it's pretty sad, but also not very surprising.
No, Michael, so that was kind of my question, but it echoes the first question we've got in here from one of our viewers called Clarke Fan, Michael Clarke, I'm sure. No other Clarks that they would be a fan of in this context, where they asked much the same as me, what did you think of it? And this, the question talks about how giddy they looked. I mean, Trump clapped as he walked down the red carpet towards him. You've given us your overall assessment, but there has been lots written about why there is this seeming space in Trump's anger at everything else towards Putin. He doesn't seem ever to be able to get angry with him. What do we put it down to, Michael?
Lots of people have got theories about that. I mean, the psychologists have been onto it and the intelligence people are onto it. They talk about compromat, deep compromat that Putin has got over Trump. And I mean, if that is true, I know a number of intelligence people who are sure it is true, but I don't know what it is, and they may not be right. I'm talking about retired intelligence people now, not serving intelligence officers. But I mean, some of them say, look, it goes far beyond, hookers in Moscow hotel rooms. It's not really all about that. It's really about something longer lasting and deeper and more financial. But I don't know if that's true or not, but it's what people think. Others say, look, it's just the dynamics of the two men. Trump was very impressed years ago by the fact that Putin talked about nuclear weapons and gave Trump the sense that, yes, he would use nuclear weapons, and that Trump has always been frightened of Putin. He's frightened of him as an individual because Putin is so clever and, well, actually he's not all that clever, but he's so cunning and so well prepared. But that also he gave Trump a clear sense that if you push me too hard, I will use nuclear weapons. And Trump has never been able to get over that, I think. And so in a way, it shows that, contrary to the belief of the last 50-odd years, nuclear deterrence works on a day-to-day basis because in this particular circumstance, it really affects the way in which a major statesperson in the Western world, President Trump, approaches his counterpart in Russia. The rest of us might say, well, you shouldn't be frightened of it. It's not that you want it to happen, but there are ways of dealing with nuclear blackmail, and it's by not being blackmailed, not allowing yourself to be blackmailed. And if ever there was a country that didn't need to feel frightened, it's the United States. But the sense is that for a range of reasons, Putin has got this hold over Trump, and Trump both likes Putin, he likes his determination, he likes his strength. Putin is very good at manipulating Trump's vanity, which is huge, of course, but also Trump is frightened of him. He's frightened of him intellectually, and he's frightened of him because he thinks he might use nuclear weapons.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, that, you've got these two nations, and yet when it comes down to it, it's two individuals, and one individual completely cowed by the other that's put us in this position that we find ourselves in. All right, that's enough for you trying to psychoanalyze Donald Trump and Putin for now, Mike. We do appreciate it, of course. Let's move on to the next question from Bramble-Headed Turtling. Are we just headed back to square one? Putin asks for land, Zelenskyy says no, fighting goes on.
Very good point. Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think I think that's where we're getting to. That I'm not sure. I don't think Putin wants his offers to be accepted. By demanding the Donbass, and he's not only demanding the Donbass, he's demanding lots of other things as well. That Ukraine should be effectively disarmed, only have a military up to a certain level, which would be far too small to defend itself. That it give up any idea of joining NATO. That's probably not going to happen anyway. Almost certainly not going to happen. But nevertheless, it's a significant limitation on a sovereign state. That there be no Western troops in Ukraine. Again, if Ukraine's a sovereign state, they can invite anybody in they want, exactly as the Russians have invited the North Koreans in. They're entitled to do that as a sovereign state, and if the North Koreans want to go and fight in Russia, that's up to them. So the right that they would obviously claim for themselves, they're not prepared to give to Ukraine because they don't regard it as a proper sovereign state. So lots of things. The Russians' demands, I think, are designed to be rejected, and they know they're likely to be rejected because Russia wants to carry on with the war because it thinks it's going to win it as things stand. And the objective is to get America out of the war. So they want to create a situation in which the whole process fails, but Zelenskyy and Ukraine take the blame as far as President Trump is concerned. And Trump then turns away and says, well, I tried. The Russians were difficult, but at least they were consistent. The Ukrainians were given a deal. They have no cards. That's the way he always puts it. You've got no cards. They had no cards in their hand, and still they wouldn't agree to what was in their own best interest. So what else can I do? And that effectively America leaves the war, or leaves any involvement in the war, and that raises big questions, of course. I mean, do they still allow the Europeans to buy American weapons and give them to Ukraine? 100 billions worth they're talking about now. Do they still provide intelligence, and particularly targeting intelligence? They may not. Or they may carry on. And the biggest one of all, of course, which we don't talk too much about, is Starlink. Elon Musk's Starlink system. More than 50,000 terminals are operational in Ukraine, really important to the battlefront. The Europeans can try to substitute for a bit of that, some of that, but not all of it. And does Starlink get turned off? We don't know. But I think the Russians are angling for a situation where this whole process fails and the Ukrainians are blamed by the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the Institute for the Study of War have quoted an interview given by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, just yesterday, where he essentially says that all of the maximalist aims still maintain. He says that Russia's war objective is to protect the people of Ukraine from the Ukrainian government. They want to protect the Russian speakers. They never talked about seizing land, leaving open the fact that they don't want to seize land. They want to control the entirety of the state again. So despite what we've heard or didn't really hear in Anchorage, despite all the diplomacy over the past few days, Russia's actual position doesn't seem to have really changed. And Sergei Lavrov, just days after this, I mean, he knows it's going to be reported, is telling us exactly that.
Yeah, and it's actually, I mean, in a way, it has changed. It's got harder. I mean, it hasn't changed in the direction of compromise. It's actually got more tough because the Russians now perceive that they've got Trump on the back foot. Remember that until a week before the Alaska summit, Trump was threatening crippling sanctions. He said, if you don't agree an immediate ceasefire, unconditional 30-day ceasefire, if you don't agree that, then I will impose 100% sanctions on your oil exports and your trade with the United States, $3.5 billion's worth, not huge, but still significant, and secondary sanctions on anyone who deals with you, i.e. China and India and Turkey. This was a big threat, which was all to be carried out the week before Anchorage. And as soon as the Russians had agreed to come to a meeting, suddenly that threat went away. And that threat has been replaced by more and more concessions, more and more sweeteners to Russia. And so the Russians perceive, quite correctly, that they're in the driving seat for this whole process. And so why not toughen up their stance? And this is the way the Russians always negotiate. Everyone will tell you this goes back to, the early Stalin days. They demand and demand and demand. They make no concession, no concession, no concession. And if they do get into talks, they make them last, days and days longer than anyone thought they would. And then at the 11th hour, when everyone is completely exhausted, apart from them, they make a small concession and pretend that they're giving you the world. And they walk away with a lot of what they never had in the first place. That's the way they do it. They've always done it that way.
I've got exactly what they want. Well, that's where it seems where we're headed. Let's move on to a question here from Howie. We've had a few questions, actually, about the Donbass. That will have been... many people have been thinking about that for the past few days. We've heard there's going to be some territorial concessions there. And Howie asks, as others have, why is Putin so desperate for control of the Donbass? At the moment, they control Luhansk. I think they've got about a third of Donetsk that they still need to try and take the entirety of the Donbass. But just explain why that little space that's left, Michael, is so important for Putin to have.
There's a number of reasons. It's a very good question. If the Ukrainians have lost most of the Donbass, why is this bit of it so important? Why not just give that up if they think they could get a ceasefire out of it? But there are some big reasons. For the Russians, seizing the whole of the Donbass would give Putin a sort of waypoint to say, OK, well, this phase is over, or this war can come to an end now. It won't come to an end, of course. But it would allow him to say to his own domestic audience, particularly the elite and the oligarchs around him, that we've achieved it. I mean, the cost may have been high, but we've achieved it. We've got the Donbass. And that would give him a rest, give him a break. So there's an element of that there. But increasingly also, or as well as that, I mean, the Donbass is really important economically. If the Donbass were at peace, in other words, if the whole of the Donbass did not feel that it was in the middle of a war in which there's artillery shells going back and forwards and drone attacks and so on, then the Donbass would become the manufacturing hub of this part of new Russia, as it were, because the Donbass was always the important manufacturing area of Ukraine, and that was part of the old Soviet Union. It was part of the weapons manufacturing complex. Lots of heavy weapons were produced there. A lot of engines for missiles, for instance, were all produced in the Donbass. It's coal mining. There's a lot of coal in the area. It's a very industrial area. About 1 million people lived there. About 380,000 people now live in the unoccupied part of the Donbass, the Ukrainian Donbass. So there's that. Then there's minerals in the area that the Ukrainians still hold. There is some titanium, lithium, non-ferrous metals, and some rare earths, the famous rare earths, of which there are many varieties. And if you look on a geological map, there's a big belt, really big belt of rare earths in between the border of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk. So you can just look at that border. That border almost goes north-south, Donetsk to Dnipropetrovsk. And across that border is a big belt of rare earth deposits, which are worth quite a lot. So there's minerals as well. And then the final point, I think, is the military side. There are a belt of cities from north to south. Even the Russians call them the fortress cities. So in the north, you've got Slavyansk, south of that Kramatorsk, south of that Druzhkivka, and then south of that, Kostyantynivka. And those 4 cities and all of the villages in between, or villages and settlements in between, are pretty heavily fortified. And they've been fortified since 2014. So the Ukrainians have been fighting for those cities for 11 years now, for a very long time. And the Russians cannot take them. They're not very far away from Slavyansk in the north, but they can't get there. They can't take it. And so if the Ukrainians gave up that defensive belt, they'd find it very hard to create a comparable defensive belt anywhere to the west of that. If they had to withdraw westwards, they'd be at the bank of the Dnieper River itself before they could construct anything like as strong. And for the Russians, if they walk into that defensive belt, just walk into it because it's given to them when they can't conquer it, for them, that will be a jumping off point for the next round of fighting, which everybody agrees there's likely to be at some point. And they would jump off from that to go westwards to take all of the territory up to the Dnieper River. So this little 30% of Donetsk is important for economic reasons, for political symbolic reasons, and for military tactical reasons because of the high ground, the ridges, the way the rivers operate, or the way the rivers flow in that area. It's an ideal defensive belt, and the Ukrainians have fought for it for 11 years.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why on Monday, when there was the meeting in the White House and there was talk of this ceding of territory, they were calling it a land swap, Michael. It was never a land swap because the Ukrainians aren't getting any land.
Swapping land that you already own, yeah.
Ridiculous. President Zelenskyy went onto social media and said at every chance he got that there will be no ceding of territory. You can just see why, from the way you've explained it, why it would be so important for the Russians to get it and why they would be demanding completely outlandishly that they should have access to it because they haven't been able to conquer it yet.
And they've put a lot of effort in, Kamali. I mean, since the autumn of 2022, you know, the invasion was in February 24, 2022. By the autumn of 2022, Putin seemed to have shifted his aims from taking Kyiv, which he couldn't do, to taking the whole of the Donbass. So from about this time, 3 years ago, they've tried really hard to take those cities, and they've not managed it. That's the point. They've been pushing at it for 3 years, and they've got close geographically, but they can't get up the slopes onto the ridges on the plateaus that these cities sit on.
Which is why, as well, it begs the question why Trump would even countenance that as being part of any settlement. Because surely if you want to make sure that Ukraine can stay a sovereign state, you want to make sure that its defensive line stays intact in any peace deal. Giving away its main defensive line is going to make it vulnerable to further attack.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that I don't think Trump seems to, if he does understand it, he doesn't see the importance of it, is that Steve Wickoff seems to have come back from his meeting in Moscow with the idea that the Russians might give away quite a lot of territory in the south, in southern Zaporizhia and Kherson. That the Russians, he said, were sort of prepared to countenance the idea that as long as they could keep a land bridge between the Donbass and Crimea, you know, Mariupol, which they took, of course, in May 2022 after a huge fight, from Mariupol through to the northern tip of Crimea, as long as they could keep that open in some way, they'd give away or give back the territory that they've conquered north of that area of Zaporizhia and that area of Kherson. Now, I don't know where that has come from, other than Steve Wickoff thinks that that's what the Russians said to him. There's no evidence from the Russian side that they're even contemplating that. But I think in Trump's mind, this idea, well, the Russians would withdraw from quite a lot of territory in the south as long as the Ukrainians are prepared to withdraw from the Donbass. I think it's a Steve Wickoff creation, and as his European counterparts have said, they think this man is out of his depth. He doesn't really seem to understand what's being said to him. He has no background on any of this, and he goes in for these one-to-one meetings without proper note takers, with a Russian interpreter, and then he flies home to Donald Trump and tells him what he thinks they talked about. It's a ridiculous way of doing international diplomacy. Yeah,
real estate guy's golfing buddy that's involved in some of the most consequential negotiations.
Good at golf. He must be good at golf.
Well, maybe not, because Donald Trump likes to win. So if it's anything like the characters, Donald Trump would have a terrible golfing buddy that he can beat every time. All right, let's move on to some of the other things that were discussed over the past few days. We've got these security guarantees. This is a Wickoff thing again, isn't it, Michael? Talking about Article 5-like security guarantees. Article 5, of course, that rule within NATO, in the NATO Charter, that if one member of NATO is attacked, all other member states come to that member state's defence. Ukraine isn't in NATO, isn't likely to join NATO if Donald Trump were to have his way. I know the UK government have still said that should be a long-term aim. But what are these security guarantees? What do you make from that use of language?
Yeah, well, I mean, from the biggest that's not going to happen down to the smallest that might happen. So the biggest would be a series of multilateral guarantees that would look a bit like NATO's Article 5 and commit everybody, including the United States, to uphold any settlement that is achieved in Ukraine. So we say, OK, if the Russians violate this settlement, then we will all react in a way that, if necessary, we would be prepared to fight the Russians directly. That would be the biggest sort of guarantee. And the Ukrainians would I think they would give away the rest of the Donbass if they thought they would get that in return, but they're not going to get that in return. Right. So coming down from that, now you're looking at, well, maybe a European force could operate within Ukraine as a reassurance force with American backup, and that backup could be very practical backup with air power. And also intelligence sharing and logistical backup. And logistical backup would be really important because any European force would be relatively small. I mean, given that the Russians have got 800,000 troops in Ukraine and the Ukrainians themselves have mobilized 450, 500,000 troops. So you've got over 1 million troops fighting in Ukraine. A European force would probably be about 40,000 maximum, 50,000 at the very most. So it would have to be pretty mobile. It would have to be very flexible, very adaptable, very mobile. It would need a lot of American logistics. That also, I think, is very unlikely to happen, but that's the next level down, where you've got some sort of Western force with real American backing that would give it the chance to enforce areas where the peace seems to have broken down. Even then, those forces would have to be prepared to fight. They'd have to be prepared to take on Russian forces, and that's a big, big issue. Down from that, next level down, is where we were probably talking about in reality. So Western forces go into Ukraine, ground forces, to train, to do the training inside Ukraine rather than in Britain. Now, Operation Interflex, to train, 70,000 Ukrainians now and is expanding. So supposing that was done in Western Ukraine, so British forces would be there doing the training, helping, and British forces and other Western European forces could help backfill for the Ukrainians. They could do other jobs, which allows the Ukrainians to get on somewhere else. For instance, they could screen the frontier with Belarus. I mean, that's always a constant worry to the Ukrainians. They're not too bothered about it, but they know they have to have a force that keeps an eye on Belarus and is screening. So it's possible that they could do that. So that's plausible. And then US air power could operate to do intelligence collection to make sure they could keep looking at what was happening. They could keep an eye on the peace treaty terms and so on. And with American air power and logistical backing in that respect, that's realistic. Even then, that might be more than the Americans are prepared to do, because Trump won't specify what he means by, possible help and coordination and backup. The other things that are possible without the United States, and again, the Europeans have to be a lot braver if they're going to do this, is to offer either air policing, to say, right, Western air forces, probably not with the US, but maybe with US help, will fly over the skies of Ukraine and will give the Ukrainians the ability to do something else. They'll look after air power. And again, for that, they'd have to be prepared to take on Russian aircraft. If Russian aircraft were releasing cruise missiles or bombs, at least over Ukrainian territory. They wouldn't take them on over Russian territory, I'm sure. But if they flew inside Ukrainian territory to release bombs, glide bombs, whatever, then the Western aircraft might go after them. That's plausible. Difficult, dangerous, plausible. Or this is the most practical, is helping in the Black Sea, to have Western force in the Black Sea in some form. Question is, how do they get there? Through the Straits, and Turkey could deny them access, but there are other ways you might operate it, in order to make sure that Ukrainian trade can flow freely in and out, and that the Black Sea is an open sea that the Russians and the Ukrainians could use, and that could be enforced both by air and sea from Western powers. That's possible. And then the final thing, they're all in the realms of from the very secure down to the not so secure. But the other alternative is that there is no peace deal, and the Europeans simply get more involved in helping Ukraine continue to fight the war. And there's all sorts of ways in which that might work out, which I won't go into. But I mean, you can start to put that menu down on a list as well.
Well, Michael, look, you've gone from the top end of it to maybe the secret stuff that could well end up happening. I mean, I spoke to former NATO Sec General Anders Fogh Rasmussen the other day, and he put it to me, when we talked about security guarantees, you shouldn't listen to anything that Russia said. The cheapest, best way of doing anything you want to do is just make Ukraine a member of NATO. Call Putin's bluff. I mean, do you think with a different American president, there would be someone that would be brave enough to do that? There's probably the argument, maybe we've talked about it before, that President Biden wasn't brave enough to try and take on what Putin would do to give Ukraine everything it needed to push back. Maybe at this point in the war, is it time to start being bolder and see if you can call this man's bluff? He's a gambler, and see if you can make him fold.
Yeah, no, I understand exactly what Anders Fogh Rasmussen was saying. Um, if an American president said we want to put Ukraine on the fast track road to NATO membership, that would be huge. It'd be hugely symbolic, and it would actually make quite a difference, I think, to thinking in Moscow. So I mean, I'm on board with Rasmussen certainly on that one. Could it happen quickly? Probably not. Not because of anything that happens in America, but the other members of NATO. It's a 32-member alliance. And remember when Sweden and Finland said they wanted to come into the alliance at the end of 2022, it took well over, it was at least over a year before they came in because Hungary opposed it. And then there was opposition from Greece as well.
Turkey too.
And Turkey,
Yep.
that they had all sorts of their own reasons to actually try to sell their support as expensively as they could. They wanted all sorts of goodies. They wanted to be rewarded for doing what the other countries were prepared to do in a way of collective action. So there would be lots of, because it would be so controversial, I think it'd be many years before you got real agreement within the whole of the NATO alliance, even if Washington was on board, to admit Ukraine. And it would be difficult, no question about it. But a declaration that Ukraine was on as fast a track as possible would actually be a huge benefit to Ukraine's sense of security. And there's a thing called Partnership for Peace. It's a sort of way of countries that may be quite a long way away from NATO membership, nevertheless collaborating and cooperating with NATO. And a number of countries are on the Partnership for Peace program. And Ukraine could be given, accelerated process through that. There's all sorts of things you could do if there was the political will to say the end result ought to be Ukraine within NATO, let's say by the end of the decade or something like that. I mean, that declaration itself would be hugely important. But I can promise you it's not going to be made for all sorts of political reasons that we're now grappling with.
Yeah, maybe the NATO within NATO is what's needed. Right, Mike, we're going to go on with a couple more questions because I think we'll be on telly in about half an hour's time doing the news show. So let's keep cracking on. All right, question here from Carlisle. Are there any other countries vulnerable to Putin that don't have security protections at the moment?
Oh, yeah. The one that's most vulnerable is Moldova, in which there is a Transnistrian breakaway group to the east of Moldova, around the river Dnistra, not the river Dnieper in Ukraine, the river Dnistra. And the Transnistrian Republic is a self-declared Russian republic. It's the old headquarters. It was the base of the old, I think it was the 16th Soviet Army, and a lot of the Russian speakers and Russian nationalists there are the families of the Russian officers that used to be based there. So Moldova is in a very perilous position and has constantly been lent over by the Russians. And Sanna Marin, who is now the prime minister, female prime minister of Moldova, is very, I mean, she's very good, and she's making the best of a position of weakness with the European Union, and the European Union want to help. But I mean, if the Russians got as far as Odessa, in the west of Ukraine, almost certainly they would have carried on and taken Moldova. They certainly intend to at some point. So that's very vulnerable. The other one that's most vulnerable is Georgia. And Georgia is governed by the Georgia Dream government at the moment, which is a sort of Moscow client. But there are demonstrations on a daily basis, literally, I think they're into the 160th day now, or something like that, of constant demonstrations. But the Georgia Dream government is just squeezing the life out of the democratic opposition using all of the Moscow techniques. But I mean, Georgia is on track to fall back into a fully fledged Russian orbit. So that's important. And then if you keep going round, Armenia and Azerbaijan were both part of the old Soviet Union, and they even Armenia now, which is very was a real client of Russia, whereas Azerbaijan broke away more completely and sort of allied itself with Turkey. But they are both now leaving the Russian sphere of influence, but the Russians would dearly love to get them back at some point. And then North Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's a huge country, but the Russians make all sorts of interesting claims about the Russian speakers and the Russian history in North Kazakhstan. That's important. Then one other country that we should mention is Belarus. You look at the constitutional changes in Belarus. Belarus is being reabsorbed into Russia as we speak. And Lukashenko has got the president of Belarus, Europe's last and oldest dictator, is got no choice over this, really. Maybe he just agrees with it. But Belarus is being drawn in constitutionally, legally, back into the Russian Federation. It doesn't attract much attention because of all that's going on in Ukraine. But actually, Belarus, I think there'll be a sort of velvet revolution in Belarus, unless there's a revolution on the streets, which there has been in the past, but it's failed. That Belarus will just be, as it were, in a velvet glove manner, will be drawn back into the Russian Federation with some new constitutional arrangement, certainly within the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I'm glad you ended on Belarus, actually, Michael, because interesting thing that I didn't realise, passed me by completely, maybe I was on leave, but Keith Kellogg recently went to Belarus, I think earlier in the summer, maybe June or July, had a meeting with Lukashenko. And then just a couple of days ago, after all of these back and forth, after his meeting with Putin, after Zelenskyy meeting, Trump posted that he was looking forward to meeting Lukashenko in the near future. So something very interesting going on with Belarus at the moment. I won't speculate. I've got no idea what is happening, but it is something, as you say, that is overlooked quite often. But you've mentioned it, that there are loads of troops stationed there. That Zapad, the exercises are about to start very soon.
That's right,
so
a couple of weeks, and there's more troops going to Zapad than ever before. And so there's a big build-up of troops in Belarus as we speak. Bigger than Zapad have ever been before. And the Ukrainians worry, of course, that maybe this will be a fresh invasion into the north towards Kiev again. I don't really think it will, but a number of analysts are watching it very, very carefully. There is something militarily going on in Belarus at the moment, whilst this constitutional, as it were, absorption process is underlying daily politics in Belarus.
And just to remind our viewers, if they need reminding, Zapad means west, and the last time there were Zapad exercises that were large, next February, Russia invaded Ukraine. All right, let's move on to, I think probably going to be one of our final questions now, Michael. And it's something that Trump said, you must have said it on Monday, while sitting around that table, which again, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. It's an extraordinary sight of him sitting around, going around the room as everyone has to sort of introduce themselves and tell them why he is so great. It was just a spectacle. He said that he has finished 6 wars. Talk us through this claim. Dave asks, can you explain the 6 wars Trump has claimed he has solved, and are they all solved?
Well, no, they're absolutely not all solved. But let's give him credit where it's due. So the Pakistan-India exchange was one that was potentially pretty dangerous. The Pakistanis and the Indians, as it were going at each other over a terrorist attack in Kashmir. And my comment for that is that by the time that they'd frightened each other over 6 days of mutual attacks, air attacks, they were looking for somebody to tell them to stop. And my view is that the tooth fairy could have stopped that one. It was ripe to be stopped, but good for the Americans. The Americans were disinterested in it when it began, and they suddenly got interested. State Department suddenly got interested on about day 4, day 5, and they realised that all it needed was to tell them to stop. And they just said, okay, well, Washington has made his point, so they stopped. So fine, we'll give them credit that they did do that.
The Indians aren't very happy that Trump took all the credit there. That's caused a little bit of a fracture, hasn't it?
The Indians tried to back away from it, but I mean that was, as I say, that was what I would call a tooth fairy job, and that's fine, and they did it.
Give them that one.
Another one is, which has not got much attention, is Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC. Now, there's a very inventive idea there that was based on deals. It was based on getting the private sector in to do deals, and Trump claims to have stopped that fighting. Well, yes, they did come up with a peace deal, but it's already broken down in effect. The M23, the rebel group, have already committed a series of massacres, which have been reported on this week. And the point about that crisis is that basically is a crisis between Tutsi and Hutu nationalists. The Tutsis, who control the government of Rwanda, were massacred by the Hutus in 1984. Sorry, 94, beg your pardon, in the Rwanda massacres. And that crisis, you're not going to solve that with a little bit of private investment. And it's spread into the Kivus, North and South Kivu, and the DRC. So, I mean, they had a bit of a deal, but that's broken down, as expected.
I might give them a half mark, though, because M23...
Yeah, give them a half mark.
Well, Rwanda says it's not linked to M23, even though everyone knows that's not true. So if the M23
Rwanda's fighting it. Rwanda is fighting the M23 because they are Tutsis. The M23 are Tutsis, and they're fighting Hutus. And it's the same with Burundi to the south. Rwanda, Burundi, Hutu, Tutsi antagonism that goes back some generations. So that's not going to be solved easily. But give it a half mark for that one. Where are we then?
Armenia, Azerbaijan? Should we do that one?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Again, both of them are leaving. They're both leaning towards the West. So again, they wanted to do a deal. And essentially, that war is over because there's nothing else to fight for. The Azerbaijanis have got Nagorno-Karabakh back, which is their enclave. They've ethnically cleansed it of Armenians, which is not a great thing, but there you are. But the Armenians are back in Armenia. The Azeris are back in Azerbaijan. There is one tiny sliver of dispute, but it is literally a corridor towards a tiny territory in the south, and that is just a matter of technicality. So again, half a mark or a full mark to President Trump for that one.
I think I might give him a full mark for that one. That's been a long-running conflict.
That's right. It's been a long running, but basically that has solved itself because the Azerbaijan got back what they lost to Armenia in 1991. So in a way, that situation sort of sorted itself out. But it does need somebody to come in and get them all to write it down. Yeah. So good, a mark for that one. But then the big ones, Iran. Have the Americans really put Iran back in their box with the Israeli-American attack? No, they haven't. We don't believe that. Gaza, obviously, Trump has not produced peace in Gaza. He's made it worse in Gaza because by giving Israel a sort of free hit on everything, by giving them a permissive environment, the Israelis are now running the war the way they want to. So the war is not going to come to an end because the Israeli government doesn't want it to, and I could go into that all day, but I won't. So there's that one, and then there's Ukraine. So the two big ones, Ukraine is not working, and Gaza, they've made it worse. Some of those smaller ones, you give them a mark or half a mark for being there, getting people to the White House to shake hands when those individuals wanted to shake hands. Yeah. And that's fine. That's one of the things that presidents should do. So, there you are. There's a bit of credit to that, but the idea that he goes around the world, solving problems is foolish.
Well, he wants that Nobel Peace Prize, doesn't he? 6 in 6 months, he said. The other ones on the list that I found from the reporting, Cambodia and Thailand, he says he sorted. And in his first term, tension between Serbia and Kosovo, he says that the US managed to broker. So, look, we'll give him the credit where it's due if he's managed to stop those wars. But as you've pointed out, Michael,
not Kosovo. No, not Kosovo and Serbia. Again, that's good. If he had done anything there, that would be good. But that's the Kosovo and Serbia is an EU issue, and Cambodia and Thailand, that's ongoing. I can promise you, I keep up enough with that. It comes and goes, rises and falls. It's partly based on the instability, the political, governmental instability in Thailand and the Shinawatra family, and there are two dynasties: the Cambodian dynasty and the Thai dynasty, and it's the sons and daughters of their previous dictators who are now at each other's throats, and that Cambodia-Thailand problem just comes and goes. Yeah, it's not the biggest in the world, and Michael, it's not going to bring either government down, but it causes conflict. Yeah.
So, Michael, are you saying that the US president might not have been entirely truthful?
Well, the problem is that his supporters accord him sort of papal infallibility now. That anything he says must by definition be right and true, and he certainly believes in papal infallibility. And if ever there's a case of a politician falling for his own propaganda, this is the case. This is the biggest case in modern global history, I think.
It absolutely is. Look, we've managed to get back into psychology of Donald Trump again. We bookended it. Michael, look, great to speak with you again. We have to leave it there because, as I said, I've got to rush out and do the news. But thank you very much. Thank you all for watching as well, submitting your questions. We'll do this again next week, and hopefully, Michael, you and I will be in the same room in our podcast studio over at Sky Studios over in Osterley, and I'll see you very soon. Thanks, everyone, for being with us.